Hello, everyone. I bet you thought Pride was over. Well, it is, but we just had to get your attention. This is the last of our events from the Pride season, and what we're doing is live streaming the History Club from last month with Patrick Corrigan, who worked on the Love Equality campaign and gives some valuable insights. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat after this. Hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone, and very welcome to History Club. On this fine June evening, we are joined by Patrick Corrigan from Amnesty International. Thank you so much for joining us, Patrick. We are talking tonight about mainly the Love Equality campaign and the fight for equal marriage in Northern Ireland here and what that involved. And I've dug out my t-shirt from the campaign from from back in the day just for a bit of nostalgia. And Patrick has a wee bit of a presentation on PowerPoint that he's going to share with us. So, Patrick, when you're ready, feel free to share your screen and give
Okay.
us a short introduction.
All right, lovely. So, thanks so much, Joe. Brilliant to be here, to have a chance to talk about the amazing campaign. It was like really a lot of fun. That the Love Equality campaign, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of twists and turns, but ultimately successful. So, what I'm going to talk about is specifically the Love Equality campaign, and I'll explain more about that in due course. But I just want to be clear as well. There was campaigning for marriage equality that happened outside of the Love Equality campaign proper. There had been campaigning activity that preceded the establishment of our coalition and our campaigning, and there was activity happening in parallel, including legal challenges that happened outside of the remit of our campaign, but it was again ultimately trying to achieve the same objective. But what I'm going to talk about specifically is the Love Equality campaign and the bit of the campaign that preceded that, before it got the brand name or the campaign name Love Equality. So I'm going to share a screen here. So bear with me while we try and get that working. And let me know if you can, maybe Joe, just with a thumbs up, if you can see that screen now. Yep. Okay. So I want to take you back to April 2015, a few weeks before the scene that you see in this photograph, and that obviously was the joyous scene in the grounds of Dublin Castle on referendum count day when Ireland voted yes to marriage equality. But a few weeks, I've been closely following that campaign, and my colleagues in Amnesty International south of the border had been very involved, led by Colm O'Gorman, the director of Amnesty in the Republic. He'd become one of the faces of the campaign, and it was something very personal to him as well, because he had actually got married to his partner in another country and wanted it recognised back in Ireland, but wanted the same rights for everybody else as well. And for us, starting point for Amnesty is a human rights issue. It's about equality, fairness. It's about removing discrimination. Um, so been seeing this campaign make great progress, and about 3 or 4 weeks out from the referendum date, the polls were showing that it was looking pretty good, and that Ireland was likely to vote yes. The Republic of Ireland was likely to vote yes. And as I was looking around me at where we were north of the border, and we didn't seem to be getting too close to it at all. The rest of the UK had legislated for same-sex marriage several years before, but as ever, with so many human rights issues and so many LGBTI rights issues, Northern Ireland was left behind. Um, and I thought, listen, there is such a good feeling with the campaign in the South. It has energized the airwaves. There's a lot of positivity in the debate, not just about the subject matter itself, about same sex marriage, but about the wider place, I suppose, of LGBTI community people in Ireland, and the fact that everybody deserved equal citizenship. So I thought this presented a huge opportunity for us north of the border, that the momentum was building, and that it was going to be a momentous day in May 2015 when the Republic, as I expected, would vote yes, and inevitably eyes would turn to Northern Ireland to be the only place in these islands without same-sex marriage, which had become, I think, a bit of a totemic issue for LGBTI rights more generally, beyond the importance of marriage rights itself, that it was about this wider debate about LGBTI rights in Ireland and in the rest of the world. So I thought, listen, there's an opportunity here for an energized campaign. There had been campaigning prior to this point, but it hadn't been successful and hadn't really taken off in the way that obviously campaigning in the Republic had. There had been 4 votes in the Assembly brought by supportive MLAs, all of which had failed to date. And there was no sign really that anything was about to change in terms of that numbers game, and we were facing into perhaps decades without real progress, just as people in Northern Ireland had to wait decades for progress on other rights issues. So I picked up the phone to 2 people I really trusted, and 2 organisations I really trusted, with whom I had worked previously on various issues. John O'Doherty at the Rainbow Project, who was the director of the Rainbow Project, and Claire Moore, who was the Equalities and Campaigns Officer at the Northern Ireland Committee of the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. And I'd worked with ICTU and anti-racism campaigning. I'd worked with John and the Rainbow Project in opposing the so-called conscience clause. People recall that. So I had the same conversation with both of them. I think I said, we have an opportunity to kickstart a big campaign in the north. How do you fancy joining forces and leading such a campaign and leading it through till we are successful? Sort of committing ourselves to driving this forward. And they both readily agreed, thought it was a great opportunity. And what we agreed immediately is that on the day of the count in the Republic, as the yes votes came in, we would announce a march and a rally in Belfast for a few weeks later, and to be able to announce that and to grab the zeitgeist, grab that momentum. And that's what we did. And so I'm just seeing if the okay, we got there. Okay, so, and this was one of the social media graphics that we shared that day, as the people were starting to count the votes in Dublin Castle. And that 3 weeks on, I think it was, that we would be marching for marriage equality in Northern Ireland too. And that obviously got great media attention, which was the idea. And we started working the phones and working the emails and all of our contacts to build support. The trade unions mobilized their membership, and that's one of the brilliant things with the trade union movement. They have so many members, and they will get out on the streets for a just cause. The Rainbow Project was obviously able to mobilize the LGBTI community within Northern Ireland, and Amnesty was able to mobilize its members on a wider reach. And we built, over the next few weeks, the momentum. We were on the airwaves pushing it, highlighting that Northern Ireland was in danger of being badly left behind here, and how we wanted to see progress. And so on forward here. So, and that was the scene then on that June date in 2015. Where we launched this campaign for equal marriage. It wasn't called Love Equality at that stage. There's 3 organisations, and huge numbers of people took to the streets to get this turn. Okay, so, and I think the media picked up and counted. There were some 20,000 people who marched that day, and that was, frankly, apart from, in my recollection at least, apart from when we marched against the Iraq War, this was like an unprecedented scale of people marching for something that wasn't a traditional, like, I feel like, orange or green type issue. And it was an amazing day for those who were there. The sun shone, and the atmosphere was so positive and determined at the same time. And we said, okay, the next time there is a vote in the Assembly, we are going to push to get a majority, and we are going to not just do the marching on the streets, but we are going to be in the corridors of Stormont, pressing hard that expectations are increased here, that Northern Ireland's going to get left behind, and we started to work really hard on that message. Meanwhile, we kept up the activity in the streets. You can't do a march every week, but you can do lots of other fun stuff. And throughout the campaign that ultimately lasted 5 years, we were constantly on the streets doing all sorts of stunts and media activities, and this was one of the brilliant moments. This was in September 2015. Culture Night in Belfast, which was a huge thing at this time, massive crowds. And on the steps of the Merchant Hotel, Malachy and Michael held the big fat gay wedding, is what we called it. And it was basically a poke in the eye to those who said the same-sex couples couldn't get married. That, well, we're going to do it anyway. And Malachy and Michael did it anyway, and there were huge crowds cheering. And again, it was just that sense of, okay, people really want to see this happen. People are behind it. And so then our attention shifted to Stormont. We wanted to get a majority in Stormont for equal marriage. We were under no illusions about how difficult it was going to be to navigate the Stormont system, with vetoes at the executive table, with the petition of concern, which meant you could block stuff within the Assembly itself, even if you had a majority. But we wanted to secure the moral victory of a majority voting in favour in the Assembly for the first time. We knew we had public opinion on our side, and we didn't commission opinion polls, but plenty of other people had done this, media organisations and the like, and there was always a clear majority in favour. So we got another vote to be held at the Assembly. It wasn't a vote on legislation, but it was like a symbolic vote. And then we started to lobby hard. And this graphic here is from an Email Your MP or Email Your MLA campaign we ran on the Amnesty web pages, where you could put in your postcode details and generate an email from you that you could personalise to your MLA saying, I expect you to vote. And you can see the date on that. 2nd of November was the date. So a few months after that big march, and we've been building the momentum ever since. And there was a huge take up. People wanted to know what they could do, and this was the key thing. And so we were having the meetings, but we were also asking people to contact their MLA directly. And MLA said in the chamber on that debate day that they'd never received such an online post bag for anything in their lives, and that people were saying that both in favour of us and those who were against us were saying, people keep emailing me and it's ridiculous, and it's this mass lobby organised by Amnesty and these groups, and it's not the real people speaking and all of this nonsense. So, but anyway, there was a huge public response to that. We, on the day I think of the vote, we did this action where we got Laura and Jane, a couple who wanted to be able to be married. I think they were already civilly partnered at that stage, to say, you vote yes, change the law, and we will invite you to our wedding. And it was, again, a bit of a stunt for the cameras, but it sort of was one of the ways in which we, again, kept trying to appeal to the media and popularise this campaign and promote the campaign through the airwaves as well as in the corridors of power. And what happened? That happened. We won by a vote, 53 to 52. It was the first time there had ever been a majority in favour, but the DUP then triggered what's called the petition of concern. So that's a way of vetoing it, to say, yeah, we know you won the vote, but we veto it because we're all going to gang up against this vote. But we knew that would be likely to be happening. In fact, we wanted them to be forced into doing that to show that they weren't willing to abide by the democratic will. That we already had the popular will behind marriage equality, and now we had the political will, but yet and all, they were still going to do their damnedest to block it every step of the way. And that's what happened. So we won the vote, but we then had this petition of concern triggered. But that enabled us then to win this was the moral debate. And around the same time, Arlene Foster, who was DUP party leader and First Minister at the time, said that she she would vote, I think it was subsequently, whenever they had been elected to the next 5-year term, that for the next 5 years of the Assembly, they would trigger the petition of concern anytime it looked like marriage equality was going to become law, if that was on the prospect. So we had them in a corner, if you like, in that they were shown to be undemocratic, and it wasn't that anybody, that the majority of people or even politicians didn't want this. It was that the DUP, that hardliners didn't want it, and that was very important for us later when we brought the campaign to Westminster. So having won the symbolic vote at Stormont, because that's all it was simply a motion backing the idea of marriage equality and that Stormont should legislate, we then set our sights. We challenged the executive to introduce a government bill to deliver marriage equality, but of course, led by the DUP, as I said, Arlene Foster set her face against it. The DUP turned against, were against it. So we had them sort of go on the record to be clear about that again. So everybody knew where we stood, including the UK government. And then we put plans together to have a private members bill. So the two ways you can get a piece of legislation passed in a parliament or an assembly is either the government introduces the bill or backbench politicians introduce it. So the government was definitely not going to introduce equal marriage for Northern Ireland. So we drafted a private members bill, and this is the work primarily of Kieran Moyna, a solicitor in Belfast, many people will know, and drafted this bill. And we then set about trying to get political support to introduce and to bring through a bill. But by this stage, as you've seen from the previous slide, there was cross-party support apart from the two main unionist parties. There was broadly cross-party support for equal marriage. There were a number of politicians wanted to bring forward a private members bill, but we got them to agree that they would do this jointly. They would do this in cooperation with us, and they would do it together. And there had never, ever been a private members bill introduced in the Assembly before that was from more than one party. So in the end, we got 5 different parties, like the Sinn Féin SDLP, Alliance, Greens, I think People Before Profit, and some individual, like Ulster Unionists, who had voted for equal marriage previously, but were, because they had a conscience vote, but were outside of the, I suppose, the mainstream of their party. So we had 5 or 6 politicians, 5 or 6 parties signed up to advance this private members bill. We had a meeting in early 2015, in January 2015, up at Parliament buildings in Stormont to agree the last few details, including whose name it would be lodged in, because it was going to have to be in one individual's name. And we actually drew lots with different MLAs' names on who were interested in sponsoring the bill. And Alex Atwood, an SDLP MLA at the time, his name came out, so it was going to be done in his name, but he was going to do it jointly with all of the other parties and politicians who were behind it. And we were going to launch the bill. It was going to be announced on Valentine's Day, February 2017. And just as we were finishing our planning meeting in Parliament buildings, this happened on that same day in another part of the building. Martin McGuinness resigned as First Minister, and Stormont, the institutions, collapsed. And there weren't going to be any private member bills or bills of any sort. And we didn't know it at that point, but that's the way it was going to remain for the next 3 years. So meanwhile, I'm just going to sort of flick forward here. Meanwhile, we set our sights on Westminster. With Stormont down, the only legislature we had to turn to legislate for this was in Westminster. And I'm flicking through some slides here to show there was lots of other activity happening, PR activity, marches. I think we did massive marches in Belfast about 4 different occasions through the course of the campaign. So this was one in 2017. You see it fronted by Brona Waugh and the actor and Lord Mayor of Belfast at the time, and various others. We were lobbying away to our heart's content, including with the DUP. I think it had actually been the first time the DUP had ever sat down with an LGBT campaign group, and I'm not quite sure to what extent they have even since. But again, I think through the public pressure, we got them to sit around a table with us and again commit. We were asking them to commit to not using the petition of concern, to accept the democratic will of the people and of the assembly, but that meeting they wouldn't. They were clear that they were going to oppose it every which way. So we brought our campaign instead to Westminster. We were at a dead end in Stormont, and it was going to remain that way for years to come. This is a photo call we did in Westminster Hall, and in the front row there you'll see two politicians there with the suits and ties, the dark side. Conor McGinn, Labour MP, and to his right, his left, the Lord Robert Hayward, a Conservative peer, both of whom we were starting to build relationships with, because they were becoming our advocates in the Commons and in the Lords, to bring forward legislation there. We did a big petition, and you can see Cara and Amanda from some of the member campaign groups. I should say, I should have said earlier that about a year or so after, I think we initially had that big kickoff march, we reinvented the campaign to include not just Amnesty, Rainbow, and the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, but the other LGBT organisations, Here and I and Cara Friend, but also the NUSUSI, the Students' Union Movement, and we did this jointly as a big coalition with Love Equality and the red branding and the hearts that Joe is so dashingly displaying there. And so this was, we started building momentum in Stormont, including we ran a big petition campaign with nearly 50,000 signatures that Cara and Amanda were handing in there alongside the politicians. Theresa May didn't come out to us. I think it was Theresa May at that point. But we kept pushing, and what we got agreement from Conor McGinn MP and Lord Robert Hayward was that they would introduce private members' bills at Westminster. One would bring a private members' bill into the House of Commons and the other into the House of Lords. And this was a challenge to the UK government. We had been pressing the UK government to do this, to have government legislation, but again, they were refusing. So we were going via the backbench route. And all of that campaigning activity, including the big petition, that was all about sort of building momentum now in Westminster, where we invested our time in building relations. And this is us sort of speaking at sort of briefing events in Westminster, etc. We were also meanwhile lobbying the Irish government. There's the Simon Coveney, Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time. We'd met Leo Varadkar, the Taoiseach, as well, and they had come out publicly in favour of equal marriage. They couldn't do an awful lot about it, apart from, again, that moral pressure and saying, why are same-sex couples in Northern Ireland being uniquely left behind here? And there was a bit of pressure on the UK government as well, and they said that they were raising it for us in there. But the UK government was refusing to legislate. They kept repeating this mantra that it would undermine devolution if they did it, and that was Stormont's role, and they wanted Stormont to get back up and running. And if we wanted to campaign for equal marriage, we should campaign to get Stormont returned. So they wouldn't help us, and that was why we were going via the private members' bill route. This was the minister in the Northern Ireland office at the time, Lord Ian Duncan, who was gay, and I think he was married himself in a same-sex marriage, because obviously they were able to in GB, unlike people in Northern Ireland. And again, we got a... What am I going to say about when we met him? He really wanted to help us, but the UK government decided they weren't going to, again, for their own political reasons, because they didn't want to step in where they thought Stormont should be, let's put it politely, like that. But what he did advise is, if we could get an amendment to a bill, a government bill in Parliament in Westminster, that they would give the UK government would make it a free vote, and they would make it clear there would be free vote. And that's what we were pressing for, that if you're not going to help us, at least don't stand in our way. And that was how we left things then with the UK government on that sort of understanding. And meanwhile, then we were working the corridors of power with Conor McGinn and Robert Hayward, and we did countless meetings over in Westminster. Conor gave one of the best barnstorming speeches I've ever heard in the House of Commons, and very funny with it too, when he introduced his private member's bill. Robert Hayward gave a great speech in the Lords as well, and it was clear from the response they got on day when they introduced their bills respectively, there was near unanimous support. It was very, very clear that most members of Parliament, both in the Commons and the Lords, agreed with the principle. Some of them were a bit uneasy about stepping in where they thought Stormont should be doing it, but on the principle, there were very few who had objections. Obviously, some of the very conservative, ultra-conservative, and some of our own MPs and peers were against it, the usual suspects, but the vast bulk, we could tell from the Lords and the Commons, were behind us. But by nature of a private member's bill in Westminster, they don't really advance, or very few of them do, and the way these had been introduced, there was no chance that they would actually get all the way through to legislation, but it was a way of raising the issue, testing the level of support in the Lords and in the Commons, and sending a signal to the UK government that, okay, the support is there. Are you going to move for us? Are you going to show some leadership on this? And I wanted to just call up on this slide. On the left is the private member's bill we had drafted for Stormont, that Kieran Moyna, a solicitor, had drafted for us to introduce at Stormont, but never saw the light of day. It was never published. It never became an actual bill in Stormont, because Stormont collapsed. And you can see on the right a copy of the cover of the bill that Lord Hayward introduced to the House of Lords. Apart from the typeface, you'll see a remarkable similarity there, because the bills that were introduced in the House of Commons and the House of Lords were identical to the bills that we were planning to introduce in Stormont. So you can see that sort of carry through. Okay, we've come to a dead end in one corridor, we're now going to move somewhere else, but it's the same targets, the same objectives. So meanwhile, we continued our marches, and this march was very movingly led by Sarah Canning, the partner of Lear McKee, who'd been killed not long before, and Sarah was able to speak very movingly about how she and Lyra had planned to get married, and once the law changed, once the law would allow them to do so, and so that was a very sort of moving moment, I think, for people in Belfast, people across Northern Ireland at that time, to hear Sarah's words. And we kept marching and kept marching and kept marching. I'm just firing a couple of pictures in here to give a picture of how dynamic and colourful and positive, and the whole movement, the whole campaign was, and that was what we were trying to do. This was about people's real lives, positive, progressive vision for this place, despite the naysayers. So where we got to then is the private members' bills at Commons and Lords weren't able to advance any further. So then what we set our sights on was making an amendment to a government bill. And so one day in the office, I got a call from Conor McGinn saying he'd got wind that the UK government, was going to introduce a bill in Parliament to get Stormont up and running again, called the Executive Formation Bill. And he wanted to make an amendment to that bill that would say you have to deliver marriage equality at the same time. And he said, can you get me an amendment drafted? I need it like tomorrow, type of thing. So I drafted an amendment. I consulted with Conor McCormick, who's a human rights law academic at Queen's, and we drafted a very simple amendment, sent it to Conor. Conor laid the amendment in the Speaker's office, and then it was up to John Bercow, the Speaker of the House of Commons at the time, whether or not he would allow it to be voted on. most of the precedent suggested it wouldn't be allowed because it wasn't really pertinent to the subject matter of this government bill, which was simply about getting Stormont up and running again. But whatever anybody else thinks of John Bercow in his time as Speaker, and he was sort of one of the most famous ones with his sort of rower of order, he gave us the go ahead. He approved that this amendment would be voted on. And as soon as we heard that news, we knew we'd won because we already had done the groundwork. We had already had the private members' bills through the Commons and the Lords. We already knew the scale of support. So by him allowing the amendment through, we knew the Commons would vote it through, and then we knew the Lords would vote it through, and we were on the cusp of victory. And the way it was framed was that the government was basically saying that they were setting a deadline of October for the restitution, for the reconstitution of Stormont, and so we set the same deadline. Said, "Grand, that's brilliant." Because they were saying if we don't want to legislate for equal marriage because we think Stormont should do it. We said, okay, fine. You're betting on Stormont being up and running again for October. We'll give you that final grace period. But if not, if your bet doesn't pay off and Stormont isn't up and running in October, you are obliged to pass this legislation. And they were left in a bit of a catch-22 position because if they weren't able to deliver a return of Stormont, then who was going to legislate but only them? And that is indeed what sort of transpired. The amendment was passed, and then that was the actual order paper from that day, the 9th of July. And that was the newspapers the day afterwards, compare and contrast. So not everybody was happy. The Daily Mirror was happy. Most people in Northern Ireland were happy. The newsletter wasn't so happy, and they talked about the mother of all parliaments imposing abortion and gay marriage. But anyway, that's democracy. So that was the battle was broadly won at that point, but we still had a few hurdles to get over. But we proclaimed victory. It's always good to proclaim victory and celebrate your success and keep the momentum going, because we had a few hurdles still to remain. So again, some of the people who had been involved in the campaign, and I see Cara and Amanda there at the front, and Adam from Cara Friend, and there's Gareth, and, so listen, lots of the people who played an instrumental part in the campaign were there again. I think we nostalgically gathered again on the steps of the steps of the Merchant Hotel, a bit like Malachy and Michael had done 5 years previously. But we weren't quite there yet because the government was taking too much time, in our view, over delivering conversion of existing civil partnerships. And there were about 1,000 couples in Northern Ireland who'd already got civil partnerships, but wanted to be able to say they were married. They wanted to be married, not simply civilly partnered. And Karen and Amanda were one such couple. And we also were annoyed at the UK government taking its time around religious marriage, because once we got the legislation passed, but then they were given a certain amount of time and grace to deliver the regulations, the statutory instruments that would actually deliver it in its detail. And they were basically saying, trust us, we are now going to deliver. But people were getting impatient, and so Kieran Moyna in the suit there in the middle, who drafted the bill for us, as you recall, we started pre-action litigation, as in we said we were going to take a judicial review against the UK government for not delivering, or for sort of welching on their commitments, essentially. As it happened, it wasn't necessary in the end, but it was a shot across the bows and a demonstration that we weren't finished yet. And from our point of view, I think what we said is that nobody gets left behind. We're going to deliver for everybody: people who want civil marriages, people who want conversion of their civil partnerships, and people who want the right to hold religious ceremonies for their wedding. and that was our next goal. But then um, we were on to the sort of happier day as well, and we were looking forward to the first actual same-sex wedding. And Sharni and Robin were the couple who it fell to become the first same-sex couple in Northern Ireland to get married, and they had been on the marches, they had been part of the campaign, and they came to us and saying, we've applied, and can we, do you want to work with us or whatever. And So they joined the campaign. It was a press conference, you see, and then not long afterwards, the press were really out in force for the big day, and we had the world's media in Carrickfergus for Northern Ireland's first same-sex wedding, and it was a brilliant occasion. And on the same day that was happening, there were some of the campaign were kindly, courtesy of Sharni and Robin, at their wedding, and others of us were in Westminster doing a thank you reception to all of the people who got the legislation passed at Westminster, including Conor McGinn, Lord Hayward, the all-party group on LGBT rights, and many others whose arms we had twisted or who had worked with us along the way. This was the statutory instruments I referred to that we were still waiting for to deliver some of the final pieces of the puzzle, the conversion of civil partnerships, the religious wedding. So we had a couple more steps, and that's one of the steps there that came through. As you see there, the dates on it: July 2020. Sharni and Robin got married in January 2020, so obviously we were waiting another 6 months for that, and indeed it didn't become actionable until the 1st of September. And on the 1st of September, I think it was, day one, all of the couples who had been waiting patiently to be able to get married as a conversion of their civil partnerships, like Cara and Amanda, who'd been right at the front of the campaign from the start, were one of the very first couples, the first couple to be able to do that. So yeah, listen, that's sort of a quick run through of the Love Equality campaign. There were many, like looking back through the campaign in order to put this together, I was frankly astounded by how much I left out so much there that we could have talked about: all the other marches, all the other photo actions, the press stunts, the letter writing campaigns, the way the events we held right across Northern Ireland. There were so many things that people did part of the campaign. It truly was a mass mobilization campaign, a great energy, positivity to it, and that's the way we tried to sort of act throughout. And it was a real joyful experience and privilege to be to play a part in. But yeah, I left out more than I was able to carry in. Those were the edited highlights. Yeah, so thanks for your patience. I know that was quite a run through of pictures and stories.
Wow, that was phenomenal, Patrick. Thank you so much. And as much as you're saying that was a a, a smaller, shorter version than what it could have been, it was probably more than a lot of us have seen, because a lot of us probably were only aware of things when, like, the petition of concern kicked in and it made a couple of seconds on the news, or for those of us who were involved with the organizations, had a bit more of an insight when we were attending the protests and marches and rallies and things. But that was really good insight. So it was 5 years in total.
It was from us deciding to crack on with it, and that was April 2015. Well, I suppose if we mark the end point essentially as the 1st of September 2020, when civil partnerships could be converted and religious weddings had been carried out as well. There was another date for those, and we had another couple with the first to have a religious wedding. I didn't even include that pic, so there was so much to get through. But yeah, it was actually, what's that, a little bit over 5 years, 5.5 years nearly.
Wow. So I see we've got a question already from Brian Gilmore. Yes, go ahead, Brian. If you feel comfortable, unmute your device and go ahead. Brian, you're still on mute.
unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Yes, I just got the last 25 seconds of that because my audio was working. So apologies for that, but it was a great presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Brilliant. Do you have a question, Brian? Or you just enjoyed the presentation?
Well, I enjoyed the presentation. I didn't have the access to sound, so I couldn't hear any of it. But I think the fault was at my end. So thank you for fixing it for me. You know. So
well,
I'm sorry about that.
No worries. You can watch back the recording when we upload this onto YouTube, and you'll be able to hear everything from the start. And sure, if you have any questions, you can always email me, and I can forward them on to Patrick for you.
Thank you.
Sure.
That is great. And thank Patrick for all his support for the LGBT community over many years. Thank you.
Absolutely.
No need. Thanks, but thank you.
Brilliant. We have a question from Nigel.
Thank you, Joe. Sorry. This is probably
Nigel, your audio has gone funny and your picture has frozen.
So whenever you had set up the campaign years ago with the help of other organizations, what was probably the most place is not the best. Can you hear me okay now?
It's clear now. Will you do that? Will you say that again? You say it again, Nigel, because we didn't hear most of it.
Because I'm doing all this from my phone, and my phone has got awful. Yeah, okay. So, sorry about that. Patrick, you might not be able to answer this question, but let's see if we can.
Sorry, Nigel.
Sorry, Nigel. Off that campaign years ago with the help of, because I seen that photo of you at the table with Edwin Poots.
Yeah.
What's
Sorry, Nigel, you're going to have to type your question into the chat.
Phone signal.
Yep, you'll have to type your.
I don't know how bad it is on your end, but I'm trying. No.
Nigel, we're mostly.
Right.
Maybe meet Nigel and ask him to. Nigel, if you were able to type it into the chat, because your audio just isn't coming through. We're hearing the odd word. That's about it.
Yep. So while we're waiting for Nigel then to put his question into the chat, Patrick, I just have a wee question about one of the graphs that you had shown in the presentation had different coloured markers. Was that to represent the different parties?
Yeah, that was the particular vote from that day, the 53-52 vote in 2015. That was the first time that there was the vote in favour of same-sex marriage. So it was essentially showing that most of the nationalist parties were voting yes. Most of the Unionist Party MLAs were voting no. Mostly Alliance were in favour as well, but there were a few people who maybe didn't show up or who didn't vote with their party if they had a conscience vote. And there were a few people who changed their minds along the way as well. So Trevor Lunn, for instance, who's an Alliance Party MLA, hadn't been supportive of us. And then over the course of the campaign, he actually came out very publicly and said he changed his mind and voted in favour subsequently. And so there were a few people like that. So that's how we sort of shifted the numbers a little bit. But that was in contrast to, say, public opinion. We never commissioned public opinion, but it had been done on numerous occasions by various media organizations or polling organizations because they knew it was a hot button issue. And there was always a very significant majority in favour. I mean, we got to the point where it was 75% plus in Northern Ireland. And when you broke that down by voting patterns, you actually saw that a majority of unionist voters were in favour of it, just as a majority of people who were from the nationalist background or other voters as well. So I would say on that issue, some people weren't very well represented by their elected representatives who were showing a more conservative outlook, let's say, discriminatory outlook than their actual voters wanted.
Thank you. And we have a question from Gareth.
Hi there. Patrick, you've Amnesty have been a very early supporter of Pride, very substantially. So that's been wonderful. But can I ask you a question about international LGBT rights? In all these years since Amnesty have been involved with Pride in Belfast, which is many years, do you think the situation for LGBTQ people internationally has got better or worse?
So, I mean, if you take a helicopter view, it's like better. Things have been improving in generality in terms of the numbers of countries where even same-sex relationships, are criminalized. That has been reducing. So we have some terrible examples. We think of places like Uganda, where the trend has been in the opposite direction, fueled by sort of authoritarian populist, supposedly politicians, weaponizing the issue. I would say taking the long view over recent decades, it is a positive direction of travel in the main. Whether you look at an issue like are same-sex relations legal or illegal? Mostly going in a positive direction. The odd example going the other way, but mostly that's been a very positive trend. If you look at issues like same-sex marriage, again, it's become a bit of a totemic, a measuring stick almost for the health of a society towards LGBT community. So again, we see more and more countries. In fact, there was another country just in the last couple of days. I can't even remember which. They've been coming thick and fast. So listen, it is not a uniformly good picture. It absolutely isn't, and it is sometimes very, very dangerous indeed to be gay. And you can end up behind bars. You can end up beaten up with the police turning a blind eye, and you can end up tortured by the authorities, and notionally at least face the death penalty in some countries. So it's a mixed picture. But if we're trying to look at broad trends, we have been marching forward.
Thanks. I think the slogan is as relevant as always. The love is a human right. I think that was a wonderful slogan. There's so much of that on the parades throughout, and that was great. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Nigel in the chat, and it is: what was the hardest part of negotiating with the parties at the table?
So, I guess with the parties, they mostly had their own positions, and we were trying to move them a little bit from, say in some cases, say like Ulster Unionism, moving it to being maybe opposed to having a conscience vote. So they're not necessarily for you, but they're not going to stop them. They're not going to stop their MLAs voting for you. Similarly, with the Alliance Party moving some of their people who were skeptical to being either neutral or positive. We also, I think, there was one or two members of the SDLP who were more religious, let's say, and who I think who decided not to show up for certain votes, and that was helpful at times. So it was about moving the numbers a little bit at the edges. So the likes of the DUP, we didn't get anywhere. Really, we couldn't get them to agree to not use the veto of the petition of concern. But that did give us a powerful argument when we brought it to Westminster to say, listen, the First Minister, who had been the First Minister till the collapse of Stormont, had said they were going to perennially use the veto, the petition of concern, against us. So how can we ever have equality for same-sex couples in Northern Ireland who want to get married? Is that what you're leaving people with, to that prospect? So they played into our hands ultimately when we had to bring the campaign to Westminster. I mean, I would say one other notable thing during the course of the campaign: the DUP stopped debating us in the media. As the BBC producers, for instance, would tell me that they had been, when an issue would come up and we were brought on to talk back, or the news in the evening, or whatever it might be, it reached a certain point a little bit into our campaign where the DUP no longer put anybody up for the debate, because I think they felt themselves that it was not a good look, and they maybe had a sense as well in terms of the wider unionist voting base wasn't really with them on this. And so in the end, it was proxies like Evangelical Alliance that we were debating against, and they were putting a particular conservative religious viewpoint, but the political opponents disappeared, apart from when a vote came up, and then they popped up again. So I think that was telling in itself, that the politicians could see the way the wind was blowing. It's just that some of them were determined to stand in our way for as long as possible.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. Any more questions before we stop the recording? Going once, going twice. Okay, I'm going to end the recording.
And I would okay. I mean, I would just say as well, maybe as a conclusion, about how how amazing it was to be part of the campaign. It was a really really positive campaign, really popular campaign, in the sense that it was people turned out year after year, at event after event, march after march, in their thousands, many thousands. And that was, again, we were able to point to that to say, listen, this is unstoppable. And it was that momentum and that the level of activism and enthusiasm of people getting behind it that made the difference, and made, the people could see it was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when we got it across the line. So just to say, it was one of the best campaigning experiences of my life to be part of it, and with all of our partner organizations, who were absolute pleasure to work with.
Great. Okay, we have another question from Nigel.
Mm-hmm. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Oh, thank goodness. Okay, this is more of a yes or no question, so I'm going to keep this really short. Now, that was probably one of the most important linchpins of any sort of queer history at all. And seeing as this is part of the LGBT Heritage Project, do you think that the Love Equality campaign should be commemorated in all future prides from now on, just to make sure that it's always honoured in that respect? Because that's always been the history of any queer rights, Patrick, is that it's always recent and it was never protected for any more than 100 years. So
I think you should, have an eye on history, and remember the battles you've won, and how you won them, and don't get complacent. But I think keep eyes on the prize, keep looking forward, and as we have learned, there is always another battle to fight, and at the moment it is the battle for trans rights and equality in the main. And I think that people who maybe got involved for the first time and taken part in marches and demonstrations and campaigning and emailing and the rest of it through the marriage equality campaign, maybe now have the experience and the energy to devote to the next issue. So I think events like this are useful to have a discussion and a look back, and to draw the lessons and the inspiration, I hope, from. But yeah, let's not get too nostalgic, and as I say, keep eyes focused. There's a long way to go yet in terms of full equality.
Absolutely, and that's what our project is for as well. Hopefully, we'll be preserving presentations like this for a long time to come. Just a wee quick question then before we stop the recording from myself. If you're okay. Patrick, I was expecting you to say at the start of the presentation that the organisations like Rainbow and Car Friend and Here and I had contacted you, but it was the other way around. You had approached them to get involved in the campaign. Was that a decision from Amnesty, or was that a personal decision?
Well, I mean, it was something I personally wanted to see happen. I thought there was a great opportunity, and I knew and respected hugely the Rainbow Project, Irish Congress of Trade Unions, and those are the first calls I made in the very first March. And after that, it was absolutely the right thing to do to widen it out to Cara Friend, to Here and I, to NUS USI. USI had been a big part of the students' movement, had been a big part of the equal marriage movement south of the border. So I think to have the campaign properly rooted in the LGBTI sector organisations in Northern Ireland was crucial. And then to have the mass membership organisations like the trade unions and the students' unions, I think it really helped with people power and getting the word out and getting people mobilised. And I think Amnesty, I hope we were able to bring like a human rights analysis that this was an equality, an international human rights standards equality issue, and that was why we were there. I don't think through the course of the campaign, anytime any of us picked up the phone to each other, like there was never an answer no. It was like, when do you want me to do it? How do we do it? And the rest of it. So yeah, there's never been anything but full buy-in and enthusiasm. And it was great to see such a united movement. Yeah, that's my maybe response on that one.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Patrick. It was a brilliant presentation, and I'm just going to end the recording here.